Welcome to the Panic Room, where we talk about all things panic-inducing. I am the Queen of Panic. Warning, some episodes may contain content that may be disturbing to others. Viewer discretion is advised. Now let the games begin.
This took place about a year prior to my bus stop story. Like I said before, I have a back pocket full of creepy encounters. Here's another one. It was 2002, I was 13, and I had just started middle school. I was opened up to many different groups of people, and I definitely found myself interested in the punk/goth group of kids. Mostly because I had a crush on one of the boys who had shoulder-length black hair and wore a floor-length black trench coat. What a weird time. Shortly after meeting him, he became my first boyfriend, and I absolutely wanted to match his style. I loved the style anyways, but matching him made me seem so much cooler back then. He also gave me an old skateboard to practice with because he loved skateboarding. I came home from school one day and begged my mom to take me to the mall to get some new clothes. My poor mom, who had just bought me a ton of new school clothes, was kind enough to take me to get new clothes in this new style that I wanted. She's a saint. So we get to the mall and I head straight for Hot Topic, Zumiez, Spencer's, and PacSun. My mom definitely wasn't ready for Hot Topic, so she bought me a pair of black, wide-leg cargo pants from PacSun, a black hoodie with a red independent logo, and some skate shoes. I wanted to be a skater girl. We got home around 8 p.m., and I asked if I can go to my friend's house to show off my new cool look. She said no, and that it was getting late and it was a school night. So I put all my new clothes on and decided to go out in my driveway and practice my kickflips. As I was heading down my stairs, I decided that maybe I should bring the cordless phone with me. This was before cell phones were given to kids. The cordless phone wouldn't work beyond my front porch, but it made me feel better. So I put the bulky phone in my pocket, took another look at myself in the mirror, and decided to put my very long hair in a low ponytail and tuck it into my hoodie and pull the hoodie up. I had a gut feeling that something might happen, so I wanted to disguise myself as a guy. My stepdad was playing video games in the family room, which had windows facing our court and driveway. I told him I was going to leave the front door open and close the glass storm door to let more light out, and also see that my mom and stepdad could easily see me if they looked out the door. I don't know why I had all these inclinations, but I was listening to them. I walked out the door to my end of the driveway and started messing around with my board. I had been out there for maybe 5 to 10 minutes when I saw a figure in the distance. There was a man, dressed in all white. He was wearing what looked like an all-white Sean John sweatsuit, white high-top sneakers, and a white pageboy hat. He stood out against the dark night, and his clothes illuminated under the glow of the street lamps. I didn't recognize him, and we didn't really have a lot of people walk around by my house because my court sat at the bottom of 2 inclined roads. People typically took different routes that didn't force you to walk downhill and uphill. He was walking with sort of a purposeful limp, like he thought it looked cool. His head looked down toward the ground the whole time, and he slowly made his way down the sidewalk on the other side of the street. I stopped kicking my board around and stayed quiet watching this guy. Once he got to where my court was, he crossed the street. I could feel myself getting nervous, but I watched him cross and continue up the street. The worry left me and I went back to my skateboard, did a kickflip, landed it excitedly, and turned around to see if this guy was still on his walking path away from my house. But then, suddenly I see him turn around and start walking back toward my court. I stood there, so confused, just watching. He wasn't picking up pace, but he was looking at me now. I waited to see if he would continue on straight forward or turn into my court, hoping he would just keep walking. Then I see his body shift to the left and turn onto the sidewalk that leads to my driveway. I kicked my board up into my hands and darted to my front porch and turned to look back, and he was standing in my driveway, taking small steps forward. I swung the door open and I heard him say,
"Bitch."
I ran inside, locked the door, and ran upstairs to my sister's room to look out her window, which just overlooked the driveway. He was still standing there with a wide-legged stance and balled-up fists, not moving at all. I was frozen in fear, and he was frozen in anger probably. After about 20 seconds, he turned around and continued back in the direction he had originally been walking. I don't know what he wanted or what he was going to do, but he gave me an awful feeling. I didn't tell my parents until the next day. I'm not sure why I waited. But at that point, there wasn't anything we could do. I don't know why all those prior feelings that something was going to happen, but I'm glad I listened and stayed aware of my surroundings. That was one of the first times I had a scarier encounter, and it definitely sticks out in my memory of creepy encounters. Always be aware of the people around you. You never know what could happen. So someone was following me home yesterday, and now I don't want to leave the house. I, 15 female, was walking home from the store yesterday, and I saw a black boxcar drive past me, extremely slow, and the man in the car clearly watching me. And when he fully passed me, I saw him watching me in his rearview mirror. I thought it was weird, and slowed down my pace so that I could tell if he was waiting for me, or just a slow driver. He was still driving extremely slow, but moved a little when he saw two guys riding past on bikes. He then moved to the edge of the short street we were on and waited there. I was still towards the beginning of the street, so I acted like I forgot something and turned around to get out of his sight. I waited and kind of peeked out to see if he had left, and when I saw he was gone, I continued walking. I didn't think it would happen, but I made a mental note that if I saw the car behind me, it meant he circled back around. After I continued walking, I made 3 turns, and was 3 turns away from my house, when I was walking up a little hill, and almost at the 4th turn, I looked back and saw the man at the corner I had just turned from, letting me know he circled back around to find me. He sat there watching me continue walking until I got up the little hill and turned the corner. Then, as I had just barely made the last turn and was close to my house, I saw the man's car just turn the corner up the street, straight across from the way I was walking, waiting there. I pulled out my phone to call my mom and walked the other way, and he soon left after I pulled out my phone. My mom came out and walked with me back to the house, and I didn't see the car for the rest of the day. But I keep thinking, he knows what neighborhood I stay in. What if he comes back? What if the next time he comes back, I'm out by myself again? What if no one's home to call? What if he sees me leaving and comes back when I'm the only one home? I'm so scared he's going to come back. I don't want to go outside. I don't want to show him where I live, especially because I'm home alone very often. I have summer school, and I have to go, but I don't want to leave the house in fear he might be waiting for me. And I'm constantly looking out the windows to see if I could spot him, especially since he was at the store I was at. He definitely stays somewhere near the neighborhood.
Almost a year ago, I, 24 male, was fresh out of college and had just moved into an apartment with my middle school bestie, 23 female, and her fiance, 25 male. This was after a long period of not seeing her in person. My bestie and I had a long, great relationship with a few rocky periods. I didn't know fiance well, but had met him a couple of times. He came off as kind of rude and loud, but mostly nice enough. I let a lot of little annoying behavior slide because she was so in love with him. I really just wanted to spend time with my best friend. Over the course of a few months, I slowly discovered that she was trapped in an abusive relationship with the most classic example of malignant narcissist imaginable. Their fights, really just him raging at her while she cried, escalated to the point where he was completely trashing the apartment, breaking her phone and laptop, hiding her car keys, blocking the door, and grabbing her arm so hard she had bruises, all while hurling out the worst insults he could fathom at the top of his lungs for hours. This man is about a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than me, so there was nothing I could do other than give her a ride somewhere else away from him until the next day. He didn't like it when I did that. Once it reached the point of physical harm against her, I put my foot down and demanded that he move out or I would call the cops. He wasn't technically signed on to the lease, so I could have him kicked out. He begged for time to find a new place. He was extremely drunk and high the night he hurt her, and he promised to stay sober until he moved. Not wanting to escalate things, I agreed on the condition that nothing like that ever happened again. My friend and her fiancé broke up soon after that. 3 weeks pass and everything is going great. Ex-fiancé has found a new place, is in training for a new job, and while still loud and inconsiderate, he hasn't caused any problems so far. I get ready for bed early. I have an important meeting early tomorrow. I put on some comfy pajamas, locking my door before I change out of habit. My bestie is out working, and it's just me upstairs in the bed and ex-fiancé downstairs yelling on the phone about something. I tune him out and try to sleep. He's moving out next week. My chest rattles from the booming footfalls up the stairs to my room, waking me from my sleep. My eyes snap open to see my bedroom doorknob rattling back and forth, still locked. He lets out a yell of pure malice and bangs on my door. He screams my name and is so slurred he sounds like he's trying to impersonate a lizard man. The hinges aren't looking so good. We lived in a crappy cheap apartment with thin doors. I have to do something before he breaks open the door, right? I say the only thing I can think of. Yo, what the fuck? Suddenly, the banging and screaming stops. My doorknob falls still. After a terrifying moment of silence, he says flatly,
"Open the door, bud. Just come open the door."
I still laugh about that one. Like after all that, I just walk over and open up. Instead, I grabbed my essentials and jumped out the window. I was on the second floor, but we lived on a hill, so the fall wasn't quite that high. I still managed to fall wrong, though. I hobbled as quickly as I could to my car and I peeled away. I called my best friend and warned her not to go home. We made plans for her to stay with a friend after she got off work. I made it to the friend's house and passed out for a few hours. I woke up to a call from my bestie. He had traveled all the way to her workplace with a knife and broke in. He assaulted her and held the knife up to her special needs client's throat and said he'd kill him in front of her. Thank God a coworker overheard everything in another room and was able to call the police in time for everyone to come out alive. My bestie also said that he was on the phone with her while he was banging on my door, and he said he was going to kill me and make her listen. I was totally alone in the apartment with him, sleeping upstairs in my bed. If I hadn't locked my door that night, would I even still be alive? If I had left my car keys downstairs, would I have been able to get away? When I returned to my apartment the next morning, my bedroom door was completely kicked in. My belongings were scattered everywhere, and the large butcher knives were missing from the kitchen, instead sitting in the corner of the hallway by my room.
I'm female, and this happened in around 2004, when I was about 14. I live in England. So at the time, I was in the goth phase of my life. On the weekends, I used to hang out at a place in the city center where all the goth/emo/alt kids used to hang. I had to get a bus from my home to/from the city center. It was a Saturday, and I can't remember if it was an almost winter or if I just stayed out a little later than usual that day. But it was dark when I got on the bus going home. As I sat on the bus, I realized I needed to grab something from the local corner shop before I went home. So I decided to get off the bus at the shop before I'd usually get off, as it was closer to the shop. The shop was only about a 7-minute walk from my house. Just to explain a bit about the area, the place where my house was quite nice, quiet, middle-class housing estate. But walk just a few minutes down the road and you are in a rougher area. The shop was in the rougher area. So I got off the bus and crossed the road to walk to the shop. I always felt a bit self-conscious when I was in this rougher area and I was dressed in my goth clothes/makeup, etc., because the rougher area was kind of where the chavs lived. Chav is like a British slang term for generally lower class people who dress/act a certain way. Being a goth was like being a walking target for chavs to make fun of. As I walked towards the shop, I got this feeling of dread and became aware of a guy that stood against the wall outside the shop. He was staring at me. I felt uneasy, but I just put it down to the guy being a chav and thought he might shout an insult at me or whatever. But he didn't. I went in the shop, bought what I needed and left. I started walking up the road toward where I lived and became aware of someone walking behind me. I looked and it was the guy that was stood outside the shop staring at me. I decided to cross the other side of the road where there were no houses, only a school, so I could try and figure out if the guy was following me or if he was just genuinely going the same direction as me. The guy crossed the road too. I walked a bit further, then decided to cross back into the side of the road I was originally on. And surprise, surprise, the guy crossed the road again behind me. By this point, I was certain he was following me, So I picked up my pace a little and crossed back over, as I needed to be on the other side of the road to get to my housing estate. The guy still followed and crossed behind me. As we were on the verge of my housing estate, I honestly don't know why I did it, but I decided to turn around and confront him. I asked him if he was following me. He denied it. I said I'd noticed him outside the shop and mentioned how he had crossed behind me every time I crossed the road. He was still denying following me. He was intoxicated with either a drink or drugs, or both. Now I'd seen him up close and he was clearly a lot older than me, probably in his 30s. He then started asking me to go to this friend's party with him. I asked him where the party was, and it was back in the rougher area, even further than the shop I'd walked from. I told him no, and told him my age so he was aware that I was a child. And after I told him I was 14, he was still asking me to come to this party with him. I reaffirmed to him that I was not going to this party, and I was just trying to get home. I wasn't being confrontational, as I was scared of angering him. If anything, I was being quite nice and polite, considering he was an absolute creep. I then said something to him like, "I just want to get home without you following me." And he told me to walk and that he wasn't going to follow me. I started walking. I took a few steps and he had once again started walking towards me, following me. This is where I ran for my life and he started to run after me. The problem I now had is that my house was pretty much a straight line forward from where I was. So if I went to my house, he would see where I lived. So I ran straight past my house and around a corner out of sight and went to a neighbor/family friend's house. Their door wasn't visible from the street, so fortunately I lost him. Fortunately, my neighbor answered the door and let me in and phoned my mom and the police. My mom came to the neighbor's house as soon as the neighbor called me, and the police came out, but I don't know if they ever caught the guy, as I never heard anything back. I don't know what would have happened if he had caught me, or if I had been stupid enough to go with him to the party, but I honestly dread to think. Needless to say, I never got off the bus at that bus stop again.
I originally shared this last night, but I deleted it on accident while trying to delete a different post. I ended up removing some specific details from the story this time around, so if you happened to catch it last night, then you got the uncensored version. I used to live in a 3-story house with my parents and younger sibling and our dog. We moved into the house a few months before my younger sibling was born, and that was when we first met the neighbors across the street. Lucas, who was the oldest child in their family, was always a bit strange, but there were some aspects of his personality that were more than just strange. They were straight up disturbing. It would take hours to cover everything, so I'm just going to get straight to the point. I'm almost positive that Lucas has been inside our house in the middle of the night. Our house was built on a hill, so it looked like it was only 2 stories from the front, and the basement was connected to the backyard. The yards in this neighborhood were much larger than they are in newer housing developments, so it would have been very easy for someone to enter our backyard unnoticed. Despite this, my family was terrible about making sure all of the basement doors were locked. My younger siblings and I would always go in and out when we were playing in the backyard, or someone would go down to let the dog out, and they would end up forgetting to lock one of the doors before bed. We also lived in a safe area where it was common for people to leave their doors unlocked. However, my family did always lock the door leading down to the basement every night, along with all the other doors on the main level of the house. I had a fucked up sleep schedule back then, so I would usually still be awake at 3 or 4 in the morning. There are 2 specific instances that happened very late at night, which make me think that Lucas has been inside of our house without our knowledge. One night, I was in my bedroom in the upper level of the house. It was probably around 2:30 in the morning when I suddenly heard the sound of an angry growl coming from downstairs. Thinking that my dog had spotted a cat in the front yard, I quickly rushed downstairs to stop him from barking and waking up my entire family. This kind of thing would happen every now and then, so I wasn't thinking too much of it at the time. But instead of going downstairs and finding my dog by the front window, I found him by the locked door that leads down to the basement. The fur on the back of his neck was standing up, and his nose was pressed to the bottom of the door. I instantly froze when I realized what was happening. There was something or someone on the other side of the basement door. I was barely a teenager at the time, so I began to panic and started making my way upstairs as quietly as possible. I woke up both of my parents, but neither of them took me very seriously. My dad just assumed that the dog was hearing random noises coming from outside, but he did eventually go down to check things out. He said that everything downstairs looked normal, but he also mentioned that we forgot to lock one of the basement doors that night. Then there was another time that I was up late in my room, but this time instead of hearing my dog growling, I heard a loud bark that echoed through the entire house. The sound was sudden and intense, similar to a gunshot, and it almost made me jump out of my chair. Assuming again that my dog had seen a cat outside, I quickly looked out of my bedroom window and tried to spot whatever he was barking at. But my heart suddenly dropped when instead of seeing a cat, I saw Lucas running out of our front yard in the pitch black. I watched him run across the street and back down towards his own house before I rushed to close the curtains and duck out of sight. I remember sitting there struggling to process what I had just seen and questioning why Lucas would be in our yard in the middle of the night. I told my mom about it the very next morning, and she said that she would bring it up to Lucas's mom. Because of these two instances, and because of other details that I can't include, I'm 99.9% sure that Lucas has been inside of our house in the middle of the night. If you knew the entire story behind this family, then you would also find the thought of this to be extremely disturbing. I do want to mention that this all happened years ago. My family no longer lives in that house, and those neighbors across the street are doing fine. But looking back on everything now, I'm realizing just how creepy the situation truly was.
I, 24 female, used to live alone in a downtown area in my city. It's known to not be the safest place in general, let alone for a single female. My building had gated parking, and a side entry gate with a code for people with pets that I used frequently with my 2 dogs. Multiple times daily as well as at night, I had to take the pups out of the gated area and walk a small ways to a grassy area for them to use the bathroom. On weekdays, the downtown is a popular place for drinking and bar hopping, so it was busy often. I had the occasional intoxicated person / group of people ask to pet them, but usually I just say they're not friendly and continue on with my night. It's a lie. My dogs are the friendliest things ever. Important. One late weekday night, it was a ghost town. The dogs were in routine though, and I had to take them out. I always had mace and keys on me. This night in particular though, I was approached by a disheveled middle-aged man who was acting a little odd but seemingly just wanted money for some food. When I said I didn't have money, he asked if I could take him to one of those bars and buy him a drink. Again, I said I didn't have my wallet on me, and he said,
I can wait down here while you go get it.
At this point, I had grown pretty uncomfortable and saw that my dogs' hairs on the back of their necks were raised. He eventually gave up after I declined and walked off, so I let my dogs finish their business and went inside. A few days passed, and I hadn't seen this man again, so I relaxed a little. I took my dogs out that night, as I always do, but this time, I could tell that they were on edge. I lazily left the side gate to my apartment propped open so I wouldn't have to type in the code to get back in. Then, they perked up as they hear something to my left, and immediately their hair stand up again, and all I can hear is someone quickly approaching me yelling obscenities. The only one I could make out was,
Those dogs won't protect you now, bitch!
From a familiar voice. I ran back through the gate with my 2 dogs, not even bothering to look behind me until I got in and shut it. As I see him pass, he was swinging around a large tree limb. The same man from a few nights before. I safely made it upstairs with the pups. I lived on the top floor, but I could still hear him screaming. So I look out the window and see him pacing up and down the road until he stops and looks up into my window. Never saw him again after that. Edit. I did end up calling the police when I safely got upstairs after he had chased me. But when they came around, they couldn't find him. I, 21 female, had just started applying for a college in my area, and I needed to go on campus to take a test for my classes. I had recently gotten into a car accident, and my car was completely totaled, unfortunately. So that means I needed to use something cheap and easy. Uber and Lyft are my go-tos in this sort of situation. However, unfortunately, Uber is more expensive between the two. In both apps, you're able to put up a profile photo to help the drivers identify you easier. I use this feature. This is important to remember as I'm white, but in the photo, I looked a little more tan because of the lighting. Growing up, I was always told to be wary and safe when out in public. With that in mind, I can remember the driver was an older gentleman in his 60s, I think. My apartment complex can be difficult to navigate since the GPS doesn't like to take you the right way to the right building. I opted to use the text feature on the app to help my driver find my building easier. He read it. Keep this in mind. Once he found me and I got in, he began the usual niceties you have when you meet a stranger. He asked me if I was Hispanic, to which I replied no and that I'm white. He suddenly became quite talkative and started complimenting me a lot for not getting upset. The ride was about 10 minutes, and within that time span he asked me if I was married or had any kids, if I had a boyfriend, whether or not I lived alone, and if I had any pets. I'm typically very alert when I'm alone with someone, and this started setting off some bells in my head. I was vague and honest with my answers, which could have gotten me in trouble. Once our ride ends, he told me that since I was such a nice girl, he'd buy my lunch. He gave me $20 and tried to continue talking with me while I was getting out of the car. I took the $20 because I truly needed it, and I was afraid to make him angry, but I wasn't interested in continuing the conversation with this guy. After I finished my test, my proctor pulled me aside and gave me a piece of paper with a phone number on it. Turns out, it was my Lyft driver's phone number. He tried to enter the building and talk to me while I was taking my test. Thankfully, my proctor had my back and had to get the campus police officer to escort him off the property since he wouldn't leave. I never saw him again. Unfortunately, I had already given him a good rating, so I continued to get him on occasion. I always canceled that ride as soon as I realized it was him. I never reported it because I was afraid of causing waves, but if I get him again, I'll be sure to report him. I'm not sure if that would hold up anymore, since it was a few months ago. If you would like to submit your stories, please check out the Panic Within subreddit. I go over those stories that are submitted, and I go ahead and I narrate them. I say go over, but I narrate all of them. So if you're interested in something like that, go ahead and take a look in the description, and you'll find the link there. We also have a Discord. You can come and hang out and get spooky with me and other narrators. We post new content, up-and-coming videos, promotions, and we also just hang out and chat, and you can come and hang out with us there. If you're interested in that, link is also in the description below. And last but not least, if you are interested in doing a collab with the King of Panic or myself, you can absolutely reach out. If you're another creator, you can do one on our channel, we can do one with you. We are completely open for collab as of right now. Looking for new stuff to do and very excited for anybody who reaches out. The best way to do that is through Twitter or Discord. I do check Instagram and I will get back. It just might take a little longer because I'm super bad at that, but I've been trying to be better. So if you do reach out there, even if it takes a couple days, I'll be there. But like I said, we're excited. So please definitely reach out and we're looking forward to it. And as always, thank you for visiting the Panic Room. You have successfully made it to the next portion of your tour. Please stay tuned for your next prompt. Click the like button and subscribe to receive notifications for when the next portion of your tour is ready to join. Thank you for watching. Don't let the panic drown you.